Welcome to True Crime Cases. Today, we are unveiling a shocking story of jealousy and violence. Maverick Turner had always been a man, defined by his sense of duty, a decorated military officer with years of service. Behind him, he had spent much of his life devoted to protecting his country, but no battlefield, no mission, and no enemy could prepare him for the challenges life threw at him in his personal life. His heart belonged entirely to his first wife, ever a vibrant, kind woman who was his grounding force. When they married, Maverick imagined a life of simplicity and love, a future filled with moments of joy and shared dreams. Eva was his anchor, the person he could always count on to brighten his days, no matter how rough life became. Her compassion and warmth had a way of making everyone around her feel valued, and Maverick knew from the moment he met her that he wanted to build a family with her. A few years into their marriage, they were overjoyed to learn that Eva was pregnant with their first child. But life, as it often does, had other plans. Eva's pregnancy was anything but smooth. Complications emerged early, medical conditions that baffled doctors and caused immense physical strain on her body. Maverick, ever the optimist, remained hopeful that they would overcome these challenges together. He was by her side during every appointment, every sleepless night, and every moment of uncertainty. Eva, despite her deteriorating health, carried on with remarkable strength. When their son Andre was born, their joy was tempered by heartbreak. Andre was born with significant physical disabilities, the result of the complications Eva had endured during her pregnancy. He required constant care and assistance with even the simplest of tasks. Maverick and Eva loved their son unconditionally, but the challenges of raising a child with such extensive needs took a toll on both of them. For Eva, the stress of caring for Andre compounded her already fragile health. The illnesses that had plagued her during pregnancy worsened over time. Despite numerous medical treatments, her condition continued to decline. Maverick watched helplessly as the woman he loved slowly faded away, her once vibrant spirit dimmed by pain and exhaustion. Within 2 years of Dirk's birth, Eva passed away. Her death left an indelible void in Maverick's heart, one that he knew would never truly heal. He was now a widower and a single father to a disabled child, a role that demanded every ounce of his strength and patience. For the first few years after Eva's death, Maverick relied heavily on Dirk's maternal grandparents to help care for the boy. They adored Andre and did their best to provide him with a loving and nurturing environment. But they were aging and struggled to keep up with the physical demands of caring for him. Maverick's military career added another layer of complexity to the situation. His duties often required him to be away from home for extended periods, and while he trusted Dirk's grandparents, he couldn't ignore the reality that they wouldn't be able to care for his son forever. The guilt of being unable to provide Derek with the care and attention he needed weighed heavily on Maverick. 5 years after Eva's death, Maverick made a decision that would change the course of his life. He met Stacy, a woman who seemed to embody everything he thought he needed in a partner. She was charming, intelligent, and appeared to be understanding of his circumstances. Stacy had never been married and had no children of her own, but she assured Maverick that she was ready to embrace the role of a stepmother. In the beginning, Stacy appeared to be everything Maverick had hoped for. She was attentive to Dirk's needs, helping him with his daily routines and engaging him in conversations about his favorite hobbies. Maverick was relieved, even grateful, to see Stacy make an effort to bond with Andre, for the first time since Eva's death, he began to feel a glimmer of hope for the future. But as the months turned into years, cracks began to form in Stacy's facade. While she maintained a polite and supportive demeanor in Maverick's presence, her true feelings about Andre slowly began to surface. When they were alone, Stacy resented Andre, not for who he was as a person, but for what he represented to her. He was a constant reminder of Maverick's past, with Eva, burden that disrupted the life she had envisioned for herself. At first, her resentment was subtle. She would sigh heavily whenever Derek asked for help with something, her patience wearing thin with each passing day. She would complain to Maverick about how exhausting it was to care for a child with so many needs, framing her frustration as concern for Andrew's well-being. Maverick, ever the optimist, interpreted her complaints as a sign of how seriously she took her responsibilities as a stepmother. But Andre was perceptive. Despite his physical limitations, he could sense Stacy's hostility. She no longer smiled at him the way she did in the beginning, nor did she make an effort to engage him in conversation. Her tone became curt, her words edged with irritation. Still, Dirk said nothing to his father. He didn't want to burden him further, knowing how much Maverick was already juggling between his military career and his responsibilities at home. Maverick, for his part, was largely unaware of the growing tension between Stacy and Andre. He was often away on missions, trusting Stacy to take care of things at home. He believed that her complaints were simply a result of the stress of adjusting to a new life. With a disabled stepson in his mind, they were a family, a fragile but functional unit that would find its rhythm in time. When Maverick received a call from his superiors about a classified 6-month mission, he hesitated. Andre was now 13 years old, and though he had grown in many ways, he still required constant care and assistance. Maverick knew that leaving Andre with Stacy for such a long period of time would be a challenge for both of them, but he had little choice. Duty called, and he had to answer before leaving. Maverick sat down with Andre to explain the situation. I have to go, son, he said gently. It's important, but Stacy will be here to take care of you. You'll be okay. Dirk's eyes filled with tears. Please, don't go, Dad. I'll be good, I promise. Maverick hugged his son tightly, his heart breaking. You're always good, Andre. I promise you'll be fine. Stacy is here, and she'll take care of you. Andre didn't argue further, but the look in his eyes haunted Maverick as he packed his bags and left. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving his son in a precarious situation, but he told himself that Stacy was capable of handling things. She had to be. As Maverick boarded the plane for his mission, he couldn't have known that he was leaving his son in the hands of a woman whose resentment and cruelty would soon escalate into a nightmare. The house that Maverick left behind was eerily quiet in his absence. At first, Stacy maintained a semblance of normally performing her duties as though nothing had changed. For the first few days, she fed Andre, intended to his basic needs. But even in those moments, her aggravation was palpable. Every meal she prepared came with a side of sharp remarks, and every request Andre made was met with exaggerated sighs. For Andre, the absence of his father was like losing his lifeline. He had always felt secure when Maverick was around, knowing that his dad would protect him from the world. Now, with Stacy as his sole caretaker, a cold wave of dread settled over him. He couldn't explain it, but he knew something was about to change. A week passed, and the first real signs of trouble began to appear. Stacy's disdain for Andre, which she had kept hidden while Maverick was around, now bubbled to the surface with alarming intensity. She started leaving him alone in his room for hours on end, ignoring his calls for help when he needed assistance to get to the bathroom. She would reluctantly help, muttering under her breath about how exhausting it was to deal with him. "I didn't sign up to be your nurse," she hissed one evening as she helped Andre back into bed. "I'm sorry," Andre replied softly, his voice trembling. "Sorry doesn't change the fact that I'm stuck here with you while your father's off living his life," she snapped. Andrew's heart sank. He wanted to tell his father about Stacy's behavior, but he knew that his dad wouldn't see the messages until the mission was over, and by then he feared it would be too late. One evening after Andre accidentally spilled a glass of water on the dining table, Stacy's patience snapped. She yelled at him, calling him clumsy and useless. "You can't do anything right," she screamed, her face twisted with rage. Andre apologized repeatedly, tears streaming down his face. But Stacy was relentless. As punishment, she refused to give him dinner that night. "If you can't even drink water properly, you don't deserve food," she said coldly. Andre, already frail from his disability, felt the pangs of hunger gnawing at his stomach. He tried to reason with her, begging for just a slice of bread, but Stacy ignored him. That night he cried himself to sleep, his body weak and his spirit broken. The next morning, Stacy continued her cruel punishment. She placed food on the dining table for herself, eating leisurely while Derek watched from his bed. The smell of the food was torturous, but Dirk knew better than to ask for any. Days turned into weeks, and Stacy's treatment of Andre grew more horrifying. She stopped feeding him entirely, leaving him to survive on the small amounts of water he could manage to get for himself. His once small, thin frame became skeletal, his body wasting away from starvation. Every time Derek asked for food, Stacy would sneer at him. "You're a burden, Andre. Do you know that your father would be better off without you?" "Maybe I would too." Her words cut deeper than any physical pain Derek had ever endured. He couldn't understand why she hated him so much. All he wanted was to be loved, to be cared for like any other child. But Stacy's hatred was a force he couldn't combat. As the day stretched on, Andrew's strength began to fade. He could barely lift his arms, and walking even a few steps was an insurmountable task. Yet, in the midst of his suffering, a sliver of determination remained. He knew he couldn't fight Stacy physically, but he could at least leave behind evidence of her cruelty. One day, while Stacy was out shopping, Derek summoned every ounce of strength he had and dragged himself to the table where his father's phone was kept. With trembling hands, he unlocked it and began typing a text message to his father. "Dad, I don't think I'm going to make it. Stacy hasn't fed me in weeks. I'm so hungry and I'm so scared. I love you. Please don't let her get away with this. I need justice." After sending the message, Andre thought for a moment and decided to send the same message to his grandmother. He knew his father wouldn't see it until the mission was over, but maybe his grandma could do something. Then an idea struck him. If Stacy denied everything, he needed proof. Summoning his last reserves of energy, Derek set up a hidden camera on a nearby shelf, pointing it toward his bed. He hoped it would capture Stacy's abuse, giving his father and the authorities undeniable evidence of what she had done. The days that followed were a blur of pain and despair. Dirk's body was shutting down, unable to sustain itself any longer. Every breath was a struggle, and every moment felt like an eternity. One evening, as Derek lay on his bed, he called out to Stacy, "Please, I'm begging you. I haven't eaten in almost a month. Just a little food, please." Stacy, lounging on the couch with a glass of wine, glanced at him with disdain. "You don't deserve it, Andre. It's better if you just disappear. You're nothing but a burden to this family." Her words were the final nail in the coffin. Andre knew there was no hope left. That night, he sent one final text message to his father and grandmother, along with the video footage he had captured. "I can't do this anymore. I'm too weak. I hope this video helps. I love you, Dad. Goodbye." As he tried to make his way back to his bed, Andre collapsed on the floor, his body too weak to carry him any further. He took one last breath, his mind filled with thoughts of his father and mother. And then the world went dark. The next morning, Stacy walked into Dirk's room and found his lifeless body on the floor. For a moment, she was shocked. She hadn't expected him to actually die. Torturing him had been a cruel game to her, a way to assert her dominance and vent her frustrations. But now, faced with the reality of his death, panic set in. She knew that if Maverick or anyone else found out, her life would be over. Frantically, she began trying to hide the body, dragging it toward the living room and attempting to conceal it behind the sofa. As she worked, she kept telling herself that she could come up with a plausible story, something to absolve her of guilt. But deep down, she knew there was no escaping the truth. That same day, Maverick was granted a brief break from his mission. For the first time in weeks, he was allowed to use his phone. When he opened it, his heart stopped. The messages from Andre and the video footage were too much to bear. His son's cries for help, his skeletal frame, and Stacy's cold indifference were burned into Maverick's mind. He couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All he knew was that he needed to get home. Immediately, Maverick requested emergency leave and boarded the first flight back home. The entire journey was a blur of rage and grief. By the time he arrived at his house, he was a man possessed. Using his spare key, Maverick entered the home and was met with the horrifying sight of Stacy trying to hide Dirk's lifeless body. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Stacy froze, her face pale. "Maverick, I can explain." But Maverick didn't need an explanation. He had seen everything in the video. The woman he had trusted, the woman he had married to help care for his son, had turned into a monster. In that moment, something inside Maverick snapped. Years of discipline and restraint melted away, leaving only a father's unimaginable grief and fury. The sight before Maverick was like stepping into nightmare. His son, his precious Andre, lay lifeless, his frail body crumpled on the floor. Stacy, the woman he had trusted with Dirk's care, stood frozen with guilt and fear etched across her face. Her hand still clutching a blanket she had been using to hide the body. Maverick's heart shattered. For a moment, he stood motionless, his mind unable to process the horrific scene. Then a wave of rage, so intense it drowned out all reason, surged through him. His military training, his years of discipline, and his efforts to remain calm in the face of chaos, all of it vanished. "What did you do to my son?" he roared, his voice trembling with grief and fury. Stacy dropped the blanket and took a step back, her hands raised in a pitiful attempt to plate him. "Maverick, listen to me. I didn't mean for this to happen. I just lost control. I didn't think he would die." Maverick interrupted, his voice breaking. "You starved him, Stacy. He begged you for food. And you left him to suffer. Don't you dare tell me this wasn't intentional. Stacy's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out of the situation. Maverick, please, I didn't mean to kill him. I was angry. It was his fault. He made everything so difficult. Maverick's fists clenched at her words. His fault. He was a child, a helpless, innocent child. And you tortured him like he was nothing. You let your anger and hatred destroy him. At that moment, the front door burst open and Maverick's mother, Andrew's grandmother, stepped inside. She had driven over after seeing the text messages and videos from Andre, her heart racing with dread. The sight of her grandson's lifeless body stopped her in her tracks. "Oh my God, Andre," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Then her eyes locked on Stacy. You did this to him, didn't you?" she accused, her voice trembling with rage. "You monster. How could you? He was just a boy. He trusted you," Stacy stammered. I didn't mean to. Don't you dare try to justify this." Maverick's mother screamed, her grief morphing into fury. "You're a devil, Stacy. A cold, heartless devil." Maverick turned to his mother, his face a mask of pain. "Mom, she killed him. She starved him to death. And now she's trying to hide his body. Andre knew this might happen. He sent me videos, messages. He tried to warn us." Maverick's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. He knew. My poor baby knew this would happen." She began to sob, uncontrollably collapsing onto the floor beside Dirk's body. Maverick's gaze shifted back to Stacy, his grief hardening into cold determination. He reached into the drawer of a nearby cabinet and pulled out his service pistol. Stacy's eyes widened in terror. "Maverick, no, please, I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't." Maverick took a step closer, his hands steady despite the storm raging inside him. "You don't deserve to live after what you've done," he said, his voice low and deadly. "Maverick, think about what you're doing." Stacy pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You'll ruin your life. You'll go to prison." Maverick's jaw tightened. "My life was ruined the moment you hurt my son. D was my world. Without him, I have nothing left to lose." Before Stacy could say another word, Maverick pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the house, and Stacy collapsed to the floor, lifeless. Maverick's mother let out a gasp, her tear-streaked face frozen in shock. For a moment, the house was silent, save for the ringing in Maverick's ears. Maverick turned to his mother, his face expressionless. "I couldn't let her live after what she did to Andre. She didn't deserve mercy." His mother stared at him, her grief wearing with her understanding of his actions. Finally, she nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know she deserved it. But Maverick, what happens now?" Maverick looked down at Stacy's body, then at Dirk's. He felt a crushing weight settle over him, the reality of what he had done sinking in slowly. He reached for his phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, Ed, Maverick's voice was calm, but heavy with emotion. "I need to report a murder too. Actually, my wife and my son are dead. I'm the one who shot my wife. Please send the police." Maverick sat on the floor, his pistol resting beside him as he waited for the authorities to arrive. His mother sat next to him, holding Dirk's lifeless hand and weeping quietly. The police arrived within minutes, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow over the house. Maverick surrendered Ed without resistance, his face devoid of emotion. As the officers handcuffed him, one of them asked, "Why did you do it?" Maverick's voice was steady. "Because she killed my son. She starved him to death. I couldn't let her get away with it." The evidence Derek had left behind, the text messages, the video footage was enough to corroborate Maverick's story. The police retrieved the phone and the hidden camera, which contained undeniable proof of Stacy's cruelty. The officers also interviewed Maverick's mother, who tearfully recounted everything she had seen and the messages she had received from Andre. Her testimony, combined with the evidence, painted a clear picture of Stacy's abuse. Maverick's trial was a highly publicized event, drawing attention from media outlets and the public. Many sympathized with him, understanding the unbearable grief and rage that had driven him to kill Stacy. Others, however, argued that no matter the circumstances, murder was still murder. In court, the prosecution presented the facts. Maverick had shot and killed Stacy in a fit of rage. Defense, however, argued that Stacy's actions, her systematic abuse and starvation of Andre, had provoked Maverick beyond reason. The video footage Andre had recorded was played in court, leaving the jury visibly shaken. In the footage, Stacy could be heard berating Andre, refusing him food, and telling him he was better off dead. Dirk's skeletal frame and weak voice were haunting reminders of the suffering he had endured. Maverick took the stand in his own defense, his voice breaking as he described the pain of losing his son and the rage he felt upon discovering what Stacy had done.